Picture this. You just retired. You planned. You saved. You did everything right. And then you get a bill from Medicare. And it's not what you expected. Not even close. We see this happen to smart people in Manchester, New Hampshire, and Andover, Massachusetts all the time. And that's what we're going to talk about today on Saturday State of Mind. Welcome. I'm Jess Panico. And I'm joined by Mike Panico. Hi, Mike.
Jess, this really gets people fired up.
Gets them going.
I just had a meeting this morning and, we open meetings kind of the same way. Hey, how's it going? Any big victories of late and whatnot. By the way, what do you want to add to the agenda today? And there's just one solitary response from this individual. He says, IRMAA.
IRMAA.
I want to talk about IRMAA.
Is that his favorite aunt?
Yeah. So all the dad jokes aside, yet IRMAA sounds like a crotchety neighbor, right? But it's actually an acronym, Income Related Monthly Adjustment Amount. Such a sexy name, right?
That's right. That's why we call it IRMAA for short.
Most people know the basics, right? When I turned 65, in a lot of circumstances, especially if I qualify, and most people do, Medicare becomes the primary resource for my health insurance, right?
Let's go.
And there's certain standard costs that we all pay, but some people pay more. According to the Medicare Trustees report, I think it's something like 1 in 10 individuals on Medicare pay an IRMAA surcharge, which is effectively a penalty or an additional amount that you pay for your health insurance beyond standard rate because your income is considered to be too high. And there's several levels for this. So you can get whacked once, twice, 3 times. If IRMAA starts applying, it could cost you somewhere in the neighborhood of several $1,000s more per year. And so if you're married, you're talking about, in some cases, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 per year more for your Medicare simply because you have too much income.
That's crazy because I think a lot of people consider Medicare to be mostly free, like Part A, Part B. Maybe there's some prescription stuff. Maybe there's a Medicare supplement plan that I have to pay for. I think a lot of people know the basics there. But to find out about IRMAA surcharges, we literally see it all the time. People didn't even know this existed if they hadn't consulted with a financial professional.
Yeah, and I think where people get into trouble with this is if you go and find yourself an IRMAA surcharge table. And so you just have to find, okay, am I single or am I married? And you look at all the different brackets that are there. It doesn't seem like it's likely that you'll achieve those brackets. Like in other words, Jess, if you're married, penalties start generally when your income is like $200,000 plus per year. So a lot of people will look at those tables and say, I'm not going to have that kind of income. I don't have to worry about IRMAA.
Right. I'm not working anymore. I'm retired.
Most of the people that we work with actually don't run into IRMAA because of planned income. So like, let's say that you're taking distributions from your IRA, you have a pension, you've turned on Social Security, all that is generally planned for. It's the unplanned for stuff that tends to trigger IRMAA's attention. So imagine you sell a property, right? Or you take a distribution from your IRA one time. I recall years ago, we ran into an individual after his wife had passed away. He was feeling particularly despondent. He knew that he was making a tax mistake in that he decided to deal with his grief. He was going to take a distribution from his IRA and buy a fixer-upper property. The man was a contractor. Sure. And he said, I could take this money and upgrade this house and either like move into it or give it away to my kids or grandkids. I knew that when I took the distribution from my IRA that it was going to trigger income tax. Sure. What I didn't know is that it was also going to trigger this separate Medicare tax. And he goes, I found out the following year I get a bill for $4,000. Plus, to add insult to injury, IRMAA surcharges apply for 2 years. Wow. Okay.
So it was one-time distribution and it wasn't even on his radar. Of course, he didn't call and talk to us about it first.
No, I try to warn people. See, the problem with the U.S. tax code is that it's complicated.
Sure.
So he did somewhat of the right thing. He said he took a measurement. Okay, if I take this distribution from my 401k, what amount of additional income tax might I pay? Am I going to jump into a different income tax bracket?
Right.
Great question. The thing is, the U.S. tax code works in mysterious ways, right? He didn't know that same distribution could possibly make Social Security more taxable. It could trigger Medicare surcharge. It can make it so your capital gains get taxed at a higher rate. Taxes are really complicated. So Jess, when you decide to do something in retirement, of magnitude, if we're talking 5 or 6 figures, 7 figures, certainly, if you're going to be moving a lot of money around, you can't just look at how it relates to income tax or capital gains. There could be other tax consequences too, and IRMAA is one of the biggest.
Yeah, it does kind of surprise me when we talk to some folks that said, hey, I took this large distribution for when I worked with somebody else in the past. And we say, well, why didn't your advisor tell you about this? And they said, what? I didn't bother calling them. So if you're working with a financial professional and it's something large, a large distribution and purchase, you may want to call them to check in there. But what about inheritance? Does IRMAA affect that at all?
It can. So like I said, generally you're attracting IRMAA's attention for unplanned for events. So you might say, hey, I'm in a groove here. I've got Social Security on. I got my pension paying me. That's all that I need. But then rich Uncle Louie dies.
Right.
Gives you a share of his IRA that you've now inherited. You've got obligations related to taking distributions from that account. And it's those obligations that might trigger IRMAA's attention. So there's nothing that, like I said, really operates in isolation in retirement. If you know that there could be like a risk of inheritance at some point, if you are thinking about, say, moving, big home improvements, anything that's going to require a lot of money moving around or money in transition, we try to like plan for that in advance so we're not getting these surprises just in the thick of it.
Whoever thought inheritance could potentially be a risk.
Well, hey, listen, I'd rather take the inheritance than not, and some of the downstream consequences than not have it. But sometimes what we think we're going to net after perceived consequences is going to be a little bit different once we explore all the different ways that we can pay taxes. And listen, I'm not going to fault for anybody for like falling into this booby trap. You've never been on Medicare before.
Sure.
Right? It's a new experience. How does it work? What do I pay? There's what's on the surface, but then there's several levels of depth because again, what you pay for IRMAA isn't just based on it's not based on age. It's based on income. And sometimes people fool themselves. Oh, my income's under control. In most years, it probably is, but there's going to be years where it's maybe outside of your control. What I want to challenge people is to think, well, to the extent that I can anticipate some of this, how can I plan in advance so I can avoid unnecessary penalties?
So IRMAA, it's here, but if we're aware of it, then we can properly plan around it.
You got it.
All right. If this information was helpful, like and subscribe for more. And check out our video on 3 Social Security mistakes you can undo. We'll see you next time.